The champagne toast was supposed to be about love. Instead, my husband of 28 years stood at the mic in front of 150 wedding guests and announced he was dumping me for his 25-year-old paralegal. "I've decided to start a new life without you, Celeste," Richard said, his voice steady and practiced, like he'd rehearsed this moment. "I think we all know this marriage has been over for a long time." The ballroom at the Rocky Manor went completely silent. The string quartet stopped mid-note. My son Ethan, still in his tuxedo, stared at his father in horror. His new bride Emma sat frozen beside him. 150 pairs of eyes turned from Richard to me, waiting for tears, screaming, the dramatic meltdown of a woman being publicly humiliated at her only son's wedding. Instead, I smiled. "How brave of you," I said calmly, my voice carrying across the silent room. From the corner of my eye, I could see Valentina Cruz shifting in her seat at table 7, where she sat with people I had considered friends for decades. The same friends who apparently knew about the affair but never thought to warn me. She was 25, beautiful, with long dark hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I walked to where Richard stood, his triumphant expression beginning to fade, and placed it in his hand. "What's this?" he asked, confusion replacing his certainty. "Something for you to read," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I turned to Ethan and Emma. Ethan sat frozen, his face a mix of shock and fury, while Emma stared at Richard like he'd grown a second head. "I'm so sorry your father chose today for this, but your wedding is beautiful, and I'm so proud of you both." Then I walked out of the ballroom, my head held high. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the anxious whispers. "My name is Celeste Matthews. I am 58 years old. For 28 of those years, I had been playing the role of devoted wife and mother. What my husband didn't know was that I had discovered his affair that very morning. I'm grateful you're here with me. Can you tell me in the comments where you're listening from? I'd love to know how far it's traveled. Now back to my story. The day had started normally enough. I woke at 6 a.m. in our home in Westchester, the colonial we'd purchased 20 years ago when Richard's career in commercial real estate was taking off. The wedding was at 3 p.m., and I had 1,000 details to manage. Richard's phone buzzed on the nightstand while he was in the shower. I wouldn't normally look, but the preview showed a message from Valentina. "Can't wait to see you at the wedding. And after, when we finally tell everyone and leave for Bora Bora. First class all the way, baby." My hands didn't shake as I unlocked his phone. I'd known his password for years, though he'd recently changed it. The new one was Valentina's birthday. Inside, I found everything. Months of messages, plans for their new life together, discussions about the 2-week trip to the St. Regis Bora Bora they'd booked, leaving tomorrow. Text threads about how he was going to make his announcement at the wedding reception because a public setting is better. She won't make a scene in front of Ethan. And most damning of all, messages between Valentina and someone at her law firm. "I checked the prenup like you asked. That thing expired years ago. The fidelity clause is ancient history. He's free and clear to do whatever he wants with the assets." I sat on the edge of our bed, reading every message with the methodical attention I'd developed over 30 years as a financial analyst. That's when I noticed something Valentina hadn't, something critical. Our prenuptial agreement had been drafted 28 years ago when my father died and left me a commercial property portfolio worth millions. Richard had insisted on the prenup, ironically, to protect his future earnings. He'd been so worried about looking like he was after my inheritance. The agreement contained a fidelity clause that Richard had demanded, convinced he'd never need it. Section 12 specifically stated that in the event of infidelity, the betrayed spouse retained all separate property, plus 70% of joint assets accumulated during the marriage. But here's what Valentina had missed. Section 18 clearly stated the agreement's duration was for the term of the marriage, plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution. There was no expiration date. Whether Valentina had genuinely misread it or lied to Richard to push him into leaving me, I couldn't be sure. But the result was the same. Richard thought he was safe. He thought he could take half of everything, including the property portfolio my father had left me. He had no idea what was coming. I looked at the clock. 6:47 a.m. The wedding was in 8 hours. I had that long to decide my next move. I called my attorney, Patricia Whitmore, on her emergency line. "Celeste?" she answered, sounding concerned. "Is everything all right?" "I need to know something," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If I discovered infidelity this morning and served divorce papers today, would the prenup's fidelity clause still be enforceable?" There was a pause from her line, then, "You found something." "This morning, he's planning to announce he's leaving me at Ethan's wedding reception today, in front of everyone." Patricia let out a low whistle. "The prenup you have is airtight, Celeste. If you can prove infidelity, then yes. Everything we discussed 3 years ago when you consulted me about updating your estate planning still applies. 3 years ago, I'd gone to Patricia about creating a new post-nuptial agreement. Richard and I had been going through a rough patch, and I'd wanted to remove the fidelity clause as a gesture of trust, to show him I believed in our marriage. Richard had refused to sign it, saying prenups are for people who don't trust each other. We don't need that anymore. At the time, I'd thought it was romantic. Now I understood he'd wanted to keep his options open. "Can you have papers ready?" I asked Patricia. "I can have them couriered to you by noon," she said. "But Celeste, are you sure you want to do this today?" "At Ethan's wedding?" "He chose the venue," I replied. "I'm just choosing the timing." The ceremony was beautiful. Ethan and Emma exchanged vows in the garden overlooking the Hudson River, and I managed to smile through every moment. Richard stood beside me in his expensive suit, looking distinguished with his silver hair and practiced charm. To everyone watching, we were the perfect couple, proud parents celebrating their son's happiness. I knew better. I could see him checking his phone periodically, texting Valentina, finalizing their plans. I watched him adjust his tie before the reception, preparing for his grand announcement. What he didn't know was that Patricia's courier had arrived during the cocktail hour. The divorce papers were in my clutch, along with printed copies of his text messages and a detailed breakdown of every asset we owned, clearly delineating what was separate property and what was joint. The reception began at 6 p.m. Dinner was served. Toasts were made by the best man and maid of honor. And then Richard stood, champagne glass in hand, and approached the microphone. I knew what was coming. Ethan, sitting at the head table, looked confused but not alarmed. He couldn't imagine what his father was about to do. "I want to say a few words," Richard began, his voice smooth and confident. "Today is about new beginnings, about having the courage to start fresh, to follow your heart, to choose happiness over comfort." I saw Ethan's confusion deepen. This wasn't the speech they'd discussed. "Which is why I need to be honest with everyone here," Richard continued. "I've decided to start a new life without you, Celeste. I think we all know this marriage has been over for a long time." The room went silent. I saw Valentina at table 7, trying to look sympathetic, but unable to hide her triumph. I saw our friends' faces freeze in shock. I saw Ethan start to rise from his chair, his face flushed with anger. And I smiled and said the lines I had rehearsed in my head before handing him the envelope that contained the beginning of my revenge. Then I hugged my son and his new bride before walking out. I made it to my car before pulling out my phone. I opened our joint credit card app, the premium card Richard loved using for his expensive tastes. With a few taps, I removed him as an authorized user. Then I drove to my sister Lauren's house in Scarsdale, 20 minutes away. Lauren greeted me at the door, still in her bridesmaid dress. "I saw you leave. What the hell just happened?" I explained everything while she poured us both wine. The discovery that morning, The text messages, the prenup that Valentina had misread, the papers I'd just served Richard. But wait, Lauren said, her eyes wide. Didn't they already book their Bora Bora trip? For tomorrow, I smiled. They did. First-class tickets, St. Regis Resort, the works, all on our joint card. The card you just removed him from? Yes. Lauren started laughing. Oh my God, they're going to show up at the airport tomorrow and… My phone started ringing. Richard. I silenced it. Then a text. What the hell is this, Celeste? Divorce papers? At our son's wedding? I typed back, you chose the venue. Another text. The prenup expired years ago. Any lawyer will tell you that. I responded, Section 18, Richard. Your paralegal girlfriend should have checked more carefully. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. No response came. My phone rang again. Ethan this time? I answered. Mom, he said, his voice shaking. What the hell just happened? I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I said. I found out this morning. It was either let him humiliate me without fighting back or handle it immediately. I chose action. This morning? You went through the entire wedding knowing? I did. Because your wedding was about you and Emma, not about your father's midlife crisis. There was a long pause. Mom, are you okay? I'm better than I expected, I admitted. Your father has made his choice. Now he gets to live with the consequences. What consequences? He'll explain soon enough, I said. Ethan, I love you, and I'm so sorry today ended this way. But your wedding was beautiful, and nothing your father did can take that away from you and Emma. After we hung up, Lauren looked at me with something like awe. You planned all of this in 6 hours? I had good preparation, I said. Patricia and I reviewed all of this 3 years ago when I wanted to do that post-nup. I already knew exactly what the prenup said, what I'd keep, what Richard would lose. I just needed to confirm it still applied. And the credit card thing? That was inspired by the moment, I admitted. But it felt right. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Richard's attorney just called. He wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. I told them we're available at 9 a.m. I smiled. Tomorrow morning was when Richard and Valentina were supposed to be boarding their flight to Bora Bora. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in Lauren's guest room, thinking about 28 years of marriage. The good years at the beginning, when Richard and I were building our lives together. The moment we found out I was pregnant with Ethan. The way Richard had held my hand through my father's death and helped me navigate inheriting the property portfolio. When had it changed? When had Richard decided I was no longer enough? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when he looked at me and saw expiration instead of partnership? My phone buzzed at 6:30 a.m. A text from an unknown number. This is Valentina. You need to call off this vindictive divorce. Richard loves me, and you're just making this harder on everyone. Let him go with dignity. I stared at the message, amazed by the audacity. This woman who'd been sleeping with my husband while sitting at my dinner table, attending my holiday parties, accepting my kindness, was now lecturing me about dignity. I typed back, Dignity would have been a private conversation. Your boyfriend chose public humiliation. These are simply the consequences. She responded, He only did that because you're impossible to talk to. He said you've been cold for years. And yet he stayed married to me, living in my inherited house, collecting rent from my father's properties, spending money from accounts I funded. Strange behavior towards someone he found so impossible. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. No response came. At 8 a.m., my phone rang. Ethan. Mom, I need to understand what's happening, he said. Dad showed up at our hotel room at midnight, freaking out. He said you're trying to take everything from him, that the divorce papers you served include claims to properties that aren't even marital assets. The properties are separate assets, I confirmed, from my father's estate. They're specifically excluded in our prenuptial agreement. There's a prenup? Your father insisted on one 28 years ago, to protect himself, ironically. He never mentioned a prenup, Ethan said. I imagine there's a lot he didn't mention. Did he tell you he's been having an affair with his paralegal for over a year? Did he tell you they've been planning to move to Florida together? Did he tell you they booked a 2-week trip to Bora Bora, leaving today, charged to our joint credit card? Silence. Ethan, I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, I continued, but your father made his choices. He chose to empty joint accounts, hide money, plan a new life, and announce it all at your wedding to maximize my humiliation. I simply chose not to let him. He emptied joint accounts? Check the papers I served him. It's all documented. Another long pause. Emma's furious with him. She said what he did was unforgivable. She actually wants me to uninvite him from the rest of the wedding events. That's between you and Emma, I said gently. He's still your father. But you don't owe him protection from his own choices. I had a feeling something was off, Ethan admitted quietly. The last few months, Dad was always on his phone, always distracted. And he kept talking about how he felt trapped, like life was passing him by. I thought it was just work stress. It's not your fault for not seeing it, I said. I lived with him every day, and I only found concrete proof yesterday morning. Ethan's voice hardened. I need to go. Emma and I have some decisions to make about our honeymoon plans, but Mom, I'm on your side, whatever you need. After we hung up, I let myself cry for the first time, not for Richard, but for Ethan, for the image of his father that had been destroyed yesterday, for the complexity I'd added to what should have been the happiest weekend of his life. Lauren found me in the kitchen wiping my eyes. You okay? Ethan knows everything now, I said. He's angry at Richard. As he should be. I never wanted to put him in the middle of this. You didn't, Lauren said firmly. Richard did that when he made his announcement at the wedding. You just refused to be a victim. The meeting with Richard's attorney was scheduled for 9 a.m. at Patricia's office in White Plains. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Professional armor. Richard showed up at 9:03, looking haggard. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie slightly askew. Valentina was notably absent. His attorney, James Crawford, was a corporate lawyer. Wrong specialty for family law, but apparently all Richard could get on short notice. We sat across from each other in Patricia's conference room. The last time we'd been in this room together was 3 years ago, when I'd proposed the post-nup that would have protected Richard from the fidelity clause. He'd refused it. Let's begin, Patricia said calmly. My client is seeking dissolution of marriage based on adultery, as permitted under New York law. We have substantial evidence of Mr. Matthews' affair, including text messages in which he admits to the relationship and discusses plans to leave the marriage. James cleared his throat. My client acknowledges that the marriage has deteriorated, but he disputes the characterization of his relationship with Ms. Cruz as relevant to asset distribution. The prenuptial agreement my client signed 28 years ago is no longer valid. On what basis? Patricia asked. The passage of time. Prenuptial agreements in New York are generally considered to have a reasonable duration. Section 18 of the agreement explicitly states its duration, Patricia interrupted, sliding a copy across the table. For the term of the marriage plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution, there is no expiration clause. James read the section, his face tightening. He whispered something to Richard, who shook his head stubbornly. Furthermore, Patricia continued, Section 12 contains a fidelity clause that specifically addresses the distribution of assets in the event of adultery. Mrs. Matthews retains all separate property, including the commercial real estate portfolio inherited from her father, plus 70% of all joint assets accumulated during the marriage. That's absurd, Richard said, breaking his silence. Those properties generated income during our marriage. That's marital property. The properties themselves are separate, Patricia replied, and Mrs. Matthews maintained meticulous records showing that all rental income was deposited into accounts in her name only, never mixed with joint funds. She paid all property expenses from those same accounts. You have no claim to any of it. Richard's face flushed dark red. This is vindictive, Celeste. 28 years together has to count for something. I met his eyes steadily. It counted for everything, until you decided it didn't. We can contest this, James said quickly. The fidelity clause could be considered unconscionable given the length of the marriage. Unconscionable? Patricia smiled coldly. Mr. Matthews insisted on that clause. He wrote it himself, in fact. He was quite concerned about protecting himself from what he called gold diggers, who might take advantage of his future success. She pulled out another document. Here's his original draft, in his handwriting. Richard's face went pale as he recognized his own writing from 28 years ago. The younger version of himself, so certain he'd never be the one caught cheating. There's another matter, Patricia continued. Mrs. Matthews has documented systematic transfers from joint accounts to an account in Mr. Matthews's name only, beginning approximately 14 months ago. Transfers totaling approximately $127,000. That's my money, Richard protested, from my salary. Your salary was deposited into joint accounts as agreed in your marriage, Patricia replied. Secretly moving those funds into hidden accounts constitutes financial misconduct. The prenup addresses this as well. Section 23 requires full financial disclosure and prohibits hiding assets. James was flipping through the prenup frantically, realizing how thoroughly his client had been outmaneuvered by a document signed decades ago. My client is willing to return those funds, he said quickly. Too late for that to help with asset distribution, Patricia said, but yes, he'll need to return them. With interest. Richard stood suddenly agitated. I need to make some calls. Sit down, Richard, James said quietly. We need to discuss your options. My options? Richard laughed bitterly. She's taking everything. The house, the properties, even the retirement accounts I contributed to for 28 years. Not everything, Patricia corrected. You'll retain your personal retirement account, your car, your personal possessions, and 30% of joint assets. That's approximately $340,000 plus whatever's in your hidden account after you return what you took. $340,000? Richard's voice cracked. I'll have to move into an apartment. I can't afford. He stopped, realizing what he was about to say. Can't afford what? I asked quietly. The Bora Bora trip. The beachfront condo in Florida you and Valentina were looking at? The life you promised her? Richard collapsed back into his chair. How did you even know about Florida? Your text messages, I said simply. You're not very careful with your phone, Richard. Speaking of which, Patricia added, there's the matter of the unauthorized charges on the joint credit card. 2 first-class tickets to Bora Bora, hotel reservations, various other expenses related to Mr. Matthews's affair. Mrs. Matthews has disputed these charges as fraudulent. Those tickets were for today, Richard said weakly. We were supposed to leave this morning. Yes, well, Patricia smiled. Mrs. Matthews canceled her authorization for you to use that card yesterday evening. I imagine you've already discovered that. Richard put his head in his hands. The meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was already clear. The prenup he'd insisted on had become his prison. Over the next week, the reality of Richard's situation became apparent. He'd promised Valentina a lifestyle he could no longer afford. The Bora Bora trip was canceled. He couldn't get a refund. The Florida condo fell through when he couldn't secure financing. The luxury car he'd put a deposit on had to be canceled. Valentina, I learned through mutual friends, was reconsidering the relationship. Apparently, A 58-year-old man with limited assets living in a one-bedroom apartment wasn't quite the upgrade she'd imagined. Ethan called me 3 days after the wedding. Dad showed up at our hotel again. He wanted to talk about reconciliation, said he'd made a terrible mistake, that Valentina had manipulated him. What did you tell him? That he needed to talk to you, not me, and that Emma and I were leaving for our honeymoon, and we didn't want to hear anything more about his drama until we got back. Good for you. Mom, can I ask you something? Did you ever consider taking him back? If he'd apologized right away? I thought about it. No, not because of the affair itself, though that's unforgivable, but because of how he did it. The planning, the secret accounts, the deliberate public humiliation at your wedding. That showed me who he really is. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. That's what Emma said too. She said anyone who would do that to you at our wedding doesn't deserve a second chance. 2 weeks after the wedding, Patricia called with an update. Richard's attorney filed a motion to contest the prenup. They're claiming the fidelity clause is punitive and unconscionable. Can they win? Not a chance. But it'll drag things out. We have a hearing in 2 weeks. The hearing was in a small courtroom. Richard arrived with James Crawford, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with his client's case. I sat with Patricia, my portfolio of documentation organized and ready. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Hastings, reviewed the prenup carefully before looking up at us. This document appears to be in order, she said. Do you contest its validity, Mr. Crawford? Your Honor, we believe the fidelity clause has become unconscionable given the length of the marriage. 28 years is too long for such a punitive provision to remain in effect. Punitive? Judge Hastings raised an eyebrow. Mr. Matthews wrote this clause himself, correct? Well, yes, but... And he refused to sign a postnuptial agreement 3 years ago that would have removed this clause? James hesitated. We weren't aware of that. Patricia slid a document across to him. Mrs. Matthews proposed removing the fidelity clause in 2022. Mr. Matthews refused, stating that prenups are for people who don't trust each other. Judge Hastings looked at Richard directly. Mr. Matthews, you insisted on this agreement to protect yourself. You refused to modify it when your wife wanted to show trust, and now you want this court to invalidate it because it's working exactly as written? Richard shifted uncomfortably. I never thought that you'd be the one caught cheating, the judge finished. That's generally how fidelity clauses work, Mr. Matthews. She reviewed the rest of the documentation, the text messages, the hidden transfers, the evidence of systematic planning to leave the marriage while securing as many assets as possible. Furthermore, Judge Hastings continued, the evidence shows that Mr. Matthews was engaging in financial misconduct by transferring funds to hidden accounts. The prenup's fidelity clause aside, this alone would warrant unequal distribution in Mrs. Matthews's favor. James tried one more time. Your Honor, my client admits to some poor decisions, but Mrs. Matthews's actions have been calculating. Calculating, the judge interrupted. You mean prudent? Mrs. Matthews maintained detailed financial records, kept her inherited property separate as required by law, and protected her assets when she discovered her husband was planning to leave her. That's not calculating, Mr. Crawford. That's smart. Richard said nothing. The court finds sufficient evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, Judge Hastings announced. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. All assets will be distributed according to its terms. Mr. Matthews is ordered to return all funds transferred from joint accounts within 30 days. As we left the courthouse, Richard caught up to me in the hallway. Celeste, please, we need to talk about this. We just did, I replied, in front of a judge. I mean, really talk, without lawyers, you and me. I stopped and faced him. What is there to talk about, Richard? 28 years, he said desperately. Doesn't that mean anything? We built a life together. We did, I agreed, and you decided to destroy it. Not in private, not with counseling, not with honesty. You planned a public humiliation at our son's wedding. You hid money. You lied for over a year. Valentina told me the prenup had expired, he said weakly. She said we'd be fine. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That you trusted your 25-year-old girlfriend's legal analysis over basic due diligence? She works at a law firm. As a paralegal, I said, not a lawyer, and even if she were, you should have checked, but you didn't, because you were too focused on your exit strategy to consider the consequences. What about your exit strategy? He demanded. You had everything planned, the separate accounts, the documentation. You were just waiting for an excuse. No, I said firmly. I was protecting myself because I pay attention. I noticed the transfers. I noticed the late nights. I noticed the distance. And yes, 3 years ago, I consulted an attorney about our options. But I also proposed removing the fidelity clause to show you I trusted you. You refused. Richard deflated. I've lost everything. No, I corrected him. You've lost what you were never entitled to in the first place. My father's properties, the money I kept separate, the protection of a prenup you insisted on. What you've lost is the life you threw away when you decided a 25-year-old paralegal was worth destroying your family. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse corridor. 3 months after the wedding, my attorney Patricia called with interesting news. You're not going to believe this, she said, amusement in her voice. Richard's attorney just contacted me with a new wrinkle. Apparently, Valentina has been served with a lawsuit. What kind of lawsuit? Her law firm is suing her for legal malpractice. Turns out she accessed confidential files, including your prenup, without authorization. The firm found out when Richard's case became public. They're claiming she deliberately provided false legal advice to Richard about the prenup's validity to manipulate him into leaving you. I sat back, processing this. Did she? Hard to say for certain, but the timeline is suggestive. She accessed your prenup file 6 weeks before Richard started talking about leaving you. The firm's position is that she either misread it spectacularly, which would be malpractice, or deliberately misrepresented it, which would be fraud. Either way, she's in trouble. Deep trouble. Henderson and Associates is a prestigious firm. This kind of scandal could end her career before it starts. And get this, Richard is considering joining the lawsuit against her, claiming he relied on her professional assessment. I almost laughed. He's going to sue his girlfriend for giving him bad legal advice about leaving his wife? Ex-girlfriend, Patricia corrected. My sources say Valentina ended things 2 weeks ago when she realized Richard couldn't afford the lifestyle she wanted. The irony was perfect. Richard had lost his marriage, his financial security, and now his relationship with the woman he'd thrown everything away for. And Valentina, who'd apparently manipulated him into leaving me, was facing her own professional ruin. There's something else, Patricia continued. Richard's business is struggling. Apparently, your divorce has affected his professional reputation. Several clients have dropped him. Why would my divorce affect his business? Word got around about how he announced it, at his son's wedding, in front of 150 people. Turns out commercial real estate clients don't love working with someone who demonstrates such poor judgment in their personal life. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition. Richard hadn't just lost our marriage, he'd lost respect, professional standing, the carefully constructed image of the successful family man that had been part of his business brand. There's one more thing, Patricia said. I got a call from a commercial real estate broker. Richard's company is looking for someone to buy them out. Apparently, his partner wants out of the business relationship, citing reputational damage. How much are they asking? Patricia named a figure. It was reasonable, actually below market value, for a business that size. Send me the details, I said. 6 months after the wedding, I sat in the conference room at Matthews and Partners Commercial Real Estate, reviewing contracts. The company I'd just purchased, Richard's company. I'd restructured it completely, promoted Sarah Chen, the associate broker Richard had overlooked for years, to managing partner, brought in 2 other women who'd been stuck in junior positions despite their talent, changed the name to Hudson Valley Commercial Properties. Richard's former partner, Tom, had been relieved to sell. I can't be associated with what Richard did anymore, he'd told me during negotiations. The way he treated you, announcing it like that at Ethan's wedding. I have daughters, I can't represent that. The business was already recovering. Clients who'd left were returning, reassured by the new management. We'd closed 3 major deals in the first month under my ownership. Richard had shown up at the office on my first day. Security had to escort him out. "You can't do this," he'd shouted as they walked him to the door. "That's my company. I built that." "You sold it," I'd replied calmly, "and now it's mine." The look on his face, shock, betrayal, disbelief, was the same look I must have had when he announced he was leaving me at our son's wedding. The same look he'd given me when he opened that envelope and saw divorce papers. Except I hadn't humiliated him in front of 150 people. I'd just made a smart business decision. 1 year after the wedding, Ethan and Emma invited me to Sunday dinner at their new apartment in Brooklyn. It was the first time all 3 of us had been together since the wedding, and I wasn't sure how it would go. Emma hugged me at the door. "Thank you for coming, Celeste. I know this year has been difficult." "Has Richard been in touch?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "He calls every few weeks, wants to have lunch, talk about rebuilding our relationship. I've agreed to meet him a few times, but it's complicated." "He's your father," I said. "You don't need my permission to have a relationship with him." "I know," Ethan said, "but I also don't need to pretend what he did was okay." Emma and I have been in therapy, actually, processing how the wedding ended. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Don't be," Emma interrupted. "Mom, can I call you Mom? You have nothing to apologize for. Dad chose to blow up his life at our wedding. You just refused to be collateral damage." Over dinner, they told me about their lives. Emma's new job at a marketing firm, Ethan's promotion, their plans to buy a house in the next few years. "We've been talking about the future," Ethan said carefully, "about kids, about what kind of family we want to build. And we keep coming back to the same question. What does integrity look like in a marriage?" "Your father and I had integrity for many years," I said honestly, "until we didn't. Or rather, until he didn't." "That's what scares me," Ethan admitted. "How do you know? How do you trust that someone won't just change their mind after 28 years? Emma reached for his hand. "We've talked about this with our therapist. You can't control what another person does, but you can control how you handle it. Your mom didn't fall apart. She protected herself. That's what we want to learn from this. Not to be paranoid, but to be prepared." "Are you happy, Mom?" Ethan asked suddenly. "I mean, really happy? Or are you just surviving?" I thought about it. The question deserved honesty. "I'm angrier than I expected," I admitted. "Not at your father anymore, really. But at the time, lost, at the way it ended, at having to rebuild at 58 when I thought I was settled. But I'm also discovering things about myself. The business I bought, I'm good at running it. Better than Richard was, actually. I'm making decisions I never got to make before. So, yes, I think I'm happy. Differently than I expected, but happy." Ethan nodded slowly. "Dad called me last week, asked if I thought you'd ever consider reconciliation." "What did you tell him?" "That he should ask you himself." "But Mom, would you? If he really changed, really apologized?" I met his eyes. "No, not because I don't believe people can change, but because I've changed too. I've discovered I like making my own decisions, running my own business, not having to check with someone else. And more than that, I don't trust him. Trust isn't something you can rebuild after it's been destroyed so completely. That's what I thought, Ethan said. I just needed to hear you say it. He keeps talking about how he made a mistake, how Valentina manipulated him. Valentina didn't make him stand up at your wedding, I interrupted gently. She didn't make him plan for over a year. She didn't make him hide money. Those were his choices. I know, Ethan said, and I've told him that. But he doesn't want to hear it. He wants to blame her, blame the situation, blame anything except himself. Emma cleared the dishes and brought out dessert, a beautiful chocolate cake. Okay, enough heavy talk. We have news. She and Ethan exchanged a look, then both smiled at me. We're pregnant, Emma said. 10 weeks. We wanted to wait to tell you until after the first trimester, but we couldn't keep it in any longer. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Oh my God, congratulations! We wanted to ask you something, Ethan said. When the baby comes, we want them to have a relationship with both grandparents. But we need to be honest. We're closer to you. We trust you more, and we want to make sure you're comfortable with whatever arrangement we work out with Dad. This is your child, I said firmly. Your decision. I won't make it complicated. But see, that's exactly why we trust you, Emma said. You just said it's our decision. Dad has already started making demands about visitation schedules, about what the baby should call him, about making sure he's not excluded. He's making it about him before the baby is even born. That sounds like Richard, I said, with a sad smile. We're going to have boundaries, Ethan said firmly, clear ones. But we wanted you to know that you're our first call. You're the grandmother we want involved in every decision. After dinner, driving home to Westchester, to the house that was now fully mine, the house Richard had once promised to Valentina, I thought about legacy, about what we passed down to the next generation. Richard had taught Ethan a lesson, though not the one he'd intended. He'd shown him what happens when you prioritize ego over integrity, when you burn down your life for a fantasy. And I had apparently taught Ethan something too, how to protect yourself, how to maintain dignity in crisis, how to rebuild. 18 months after the wedding, I was featured in a local business magazine. The article was about my turnaround of Hudson Valley commercial properties, how I'd increased revenue by 40% in my first year, how I'd built a reputation for ethical dealing and mentorship of women in commercial real estate. The journalist had asked about my divorce. I'd kept my answer brief. My ex-husband and I had different visions for our lives. I'm focused on building something sustainable now. The article mentioned in passing that I'd purchased the company from my ex-husband's former partner. It didn't mention the wedding announcement, the affair, or the prenup that had protected me. I'd asked them to keep those details private, and they'd respected that. Richard apparently had not been so discreet. According to mutual friends, he'd been telling anyone who would listen his version of events, how I'd been cold for years, how I'd trapped him in a marriage he'd outgrown, how the prenup was unfair, how I'd turned his son against him. Most people, I gathered, didn't believe him, especially after Valentina's lawsuit became public record. The story of a paralegal accessing confidential files to manipulate her boss into leaving his wife was too salacious to ignore. Valentina had lost her job, of course. Henderson and Associates had settled with Richard out of court for an undisclosed amount, hush money essentially, to avoid further scandal. She'd moved to California, according to LinkedIn. Working as a legal secretary now, her career aspirations derailed. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices. Richard, I heard, was living in a modest apartment in Yonkers, working as an independent broker, struggling to rebuild his reputation. He'd started dating again, women closer to his own age this time, apparently having learned at least that lesson. His relationship with Ethan remained strained. They had lunch once a month, but there was a distance that hadn't existed before, a wariness. Emma had told me that Ethan still flinched when Richard tried to give advice, remembering how his father's judgment had failed so spectacularly. 2 years after the wedding, on what would have been our 30th anniversary, I received a letter from Richard. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my office. Dear Celeste, I know I have no right to write to you. I know I destroyed what we had, and I know I can never repair it. But on what would have been our anniversary, I need to say some things. I was a fool, not just for the affair, though that was foolish enough, but for how I ended things. The wedding announcement was cruel and cowardly. I thought it would make me feel powerful, in control. Instead, it just showed everyone who I really was. You asked me once why I refused to sign the post-nuptial agreement you proposed. The truth is, I was already thinking about leaving. Not with Valentina yet. This was before her. But I was feeling trapped, feeling old, feeling like life was passing me by. And some part of me wanted to keep my options open. That's pathetic, I know. But it's the truth. I've been in therapy for the past year. My therapist asked me what I was running from when I started the affair. I said I was running from feeling invisible, from feeling past my prime. She asked what I was running toward. I realized I didn't have an answer. I wasn't running toward anything. I was just running. I lost everything in that run. My marriage, my son's respect, my business, my reputation. And for what? A few months with a woman who was using me as much as I was using her? I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I destroyed, and I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I hope you're happy, Celeste. I hope you've built something good from the wreckage I left behind. Love, Richard. I read the letter twice, then put it in my desk drawer. It was probably the most honest thing Richard had ever said to me. And maybe, in some small way, it represented growth, but it didn't change anything. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the hurt. Apologies don't rebuild trust. I wrote back, a brief email, keeping it simple. Richard, I received your letter. Thank you for the honesty. I hope therapy helps you build a better life going forward. Regarding Ethan and the baby, he's asked me to let you know that he'll call you next week to discuss visitation arrangements. Emma is due in 3 months. They want clear boundaries, but they want you to be part of the baby's life. I've moved forward. I hope you can too. I stood in the hospital waiting room with Emma's parents, waiting for Ethan to emerge and tell us about the birth. Richard was there too, sitting on the opposite side of the room. We'd acknowledged each other with a polite nod, but hadn't spoken. There was nothing left to say. When Ethan finally came out, exhausted and elated, he went to Emma's parents first. They were closer to the delivery room. Then he crossed to me. It's a girl, he said, hugging me tightly. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They're naming her Charlotte, after Emma's grandmother. Congratulations, sweetheart, I whispered. How's Emma? Tired but good. She wants to see you first, if that's okay. I glanced at Richard, whose face had tightened at the phrase, see you first. But he said nothing. Emma was radiant despite her exhaustion, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink. Mom, she said. She'd been calling me that for over a year now. Meet Charlotte. I held my granddaughter for the first time, this tiny, perfect person who represented the future. A future that had nothing to do with the past Richard and I had shared, and everything to do with what Ethan and Emma were building. She's beautiful, I whispered. We want to ask you something, Emma said. We've been thinking about Charlotte's future, about college funds and financial security. Would you be willing to be the trustee of her trust fund? We trust your judgment more than anyone's. I would be honored, I said. Later, watching Richard hold Charlotte for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not longing, not regret, but a kind of peace. This wasn't my marriage anymore. It wasn't even my grief. It was just done. Richard looked up and caught my eye. For a moment, we shared something, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. We had created something beautiful together once, Ethan, and now Ethan had created something beautiful with Emma. Charlotte. The rest, the affair, the divorce, the destruction, was just the wreckage we'd had to climb over to get here. 5 years after the wedding, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference in Manhattan. The topic was resilience and reinvention after major life transitions. I stood on stage, looking out at 300 women, and told my story. Not the gossip version, not the revenge fantasy version, but the real version. 5 years ago, I said, my husband of 28 years announced he was leaving me at our son's wedding, in front of 150 people. It was meant to humiliate me, to make me powerless. The room was silent, attentive. Instead, it became the moment I took my power back. Not because I'd been preparing for months, though preparation helped, not because I had a prenup, though that helped too, but because I made a choice in that moment. I chose not to collapse. I chose not to beg. I chose to walk out with my head high. I clicked to the next slide, showing the growth trajectory of Hudson Valley commercial properties. This is what happened next. I bought my ex-husband's failing business and turned it into one of the most successful commercial real estate firms in the region. I promoted women he'd overlooked. I created mentorship programs. I built something sustainable. Another slide, a photo of me with Charlotte on her 3rd birthday. This is my granddaughter. She'll grow up knowing that when life knocked her grandmother down, she got back up and built something better. That's the legacy I'm choosing. During the Q&A, a woman in her 40s raised her hand. How did you know you'd be okay? When you walked out of that wedding reception, how did you know you wouldn't fall apart? I didn't, I admitted. I was terrified. But I'd spent 30 years as a financial analyst. I knew how to assess risk, how to plan for contingencies, how to protect assets. I applied those same skills to my personal life, and it turned out I was stronger than I thought. Another woman. Do you regret the 28 years you spent with him? I thought about it. I regret how it ended. I regret the time I spent questioning my worth after he left. But I don't regret Ethan. I don't regret the good years we had. And I don't regret the lessons I learned from the bad ones. Everything that happened made me who I am now. Are you happy? Someone called out. I smiled. I'm 63 years old. I run a successful business. I have a son who respects me, a daughter-in-law who loves me, and a granddaughter who lights up my world. I make my own decisions. I answer to no one. So yes, I'm happy. Differently than I expected, but happy. After the conference, a young woman approached me, mid-20s, Latina, with intelligent eyes and a familiar face. It took me a moment to place her. Miss Matthews? I'm Sophia Cruz, Valentina's younger sister. I stiffened slightly. I see. I wanted to apologize, she said quickly, for what my sister did. The way she manipulated your husband, accessed those files, it was wrong. Our whole family was ashamed. You don't need to apologize for your sister's choices, I said carefully. I know, but I wanted you to know what happened to Valentina, losing her career. It changed her. She's in therapy now, trying to understand why she did what she did. She asked me to tell you she's sorry if I ever got the chance. That's between her and her conscience, I replied, but thank you for telling me. Sophia nodded, then surprised me by adding, Your speech today, it helped me. I'm in law school now, studying family law, partially because of what happened with Valentina. I want to help protect people like you who get blindsided by partners they trusted. I looked at this young woman who carried no responsibility for her sister's actions, but was somehow trying to make amends through her career choice. That's admirable, I said sincerely. The world needs good family law attorneys. People who understand that divorce isn't just about splitting assets, it's about protecting people at their most vulnerable. We talked for a few more minutes. She gave me her card, said she'd love to stay in touch, to learn from my experience as she built her practice. After she left, I stood in the empty conference room, thinking about circles closing. Valentina had tried to destroy my life and ended up destroying her own. Now her sister was trying to build something good from that wreckage. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that revenge is sweet or that good wins over evil, but that we all make choices, and those choices ripple outward in ways we can't predict. Richard's choice to announce his departure at the wedding had seemed like power, but it had actually been the moment he lost everything: his marriage, his business, his son's full trust. My choice to walk out with dignity, to protect myself, to rebuild, that had seemed like survival, but it had actually been the moment I discovered who I was without him. The envelope I'd handed Richard at the wedding hadn't just contained divorce papers. It had contained the beginning of my new life, a life where I made the decisions, where I protected what mattered, where I didn't wait for permission to be strong. My name is Celeste. I am 63 years old, and I have finally learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to let someone else's choices define your future. It's taking the wreckage they leave behind and building something better from it. Has this ever happened to you or a friend of yours? I would love to hear your story. Can you also do me a favor and subscribe to this channel? This way, we can meet again in another story.